What's up, guys? We are back reviewing all of the best Jumpstart 2025 cards for Commander. My name is Nathan. You are watching the Salty Productions YouTube channel. Jumpstart 2025 is a supplemental Magic the Gathering set that's coming out with Foundations on November 15th, and while this set is designed for Standard, we're going to be taking a look at the set through the lens of Commander to see which cards will make a dent in the format. Before we get into the video, just like to ask if you like this type of content, leave a like on the video and subscribe to stay tuned for more amazing content from me. And real quick, this video is brought to us by our comment of the week, which is from Biostem, who commented on my Blue Foundation set video. He says, always really enjoy your set reviews. Blue did feel a little underserved this set for Commander. Not a single card I'm really stoked to slot. Leyline Axe and Banner, I believe he's referencing Banner of Kinship, are going everywhere though. Are you going to do a Jumpstart review as well? So this video dedicated to you, Biostem. Hopefully you're watching and you can see which cards you want to slot into your Commander decks. But without further ado, we can hop right into it here, starting us off here with Thurid, Mare of Destiny, 4-mana 2/4 legendary creature Pegasus. It has flying lifelink. Whenever you cast a Pegasus, Unicorn, or Horse creature spell, copy it. The copy becomes a token. Other Pegasi, Unicorns, and horses you control get +1/+1. Now, if this looks familiar, it's because it's basically a typo version of Volo Guide to Monsters, where for 4 mana, you generally can expect to be copying your next spells. This commander is just a good setup piece if you're in that specific tribe. I do think it's nice that there is another Anthem effect on top of this, and if you start to buff a Thurid, then you can start gaining some life, which is very, very nice. The trade-off for all of that text, though, is that you're in a barely supported archetype, being horses. I think primarily would be, out of all of these, are probably the most supported at this point in time. The best card in the game that is a horse is Crested Sunmare. It's a 5/5 for 5. Other horses you control have indestructible, and at the beginning of each end step, it makes you a 5/5 white horse creature token if you gain life, which obviously Third is going to be doing for you. So WotC definitely designed this with Crested Sunmare in mind, and it curves out very nicely from 4 to 5. I think it's definitely very costed. It's just that you need to get enough of that relevant creature type to make a deck around this as your commander. Obviously, in a 99, it's going to be great, but as a commander, you are limited to only mono white. So I looked at Scryfall, and specifically, if we look at only actual horses, Pegasi, or unicorns, that puts us at 60 creature types, and that's all of them that are legal in Commander, right? So if you take, the top 20% of those, that gets you to about 12 playable horses, and I'm just sort of making this up off the top of my head. But if you then expand that search to include Changeling, which means the creature is every creature type, that increases it to 72. So if we then take, let's say all of the Changelings and the top 20% of the horses, that's 24 creatures that you can make sort of work in this deck. You're then trying to get as much value off of Third as you possibly can, because these creatures are probably not going to be synergizing incredibly well with each other. But I just wanted to, give you guys that warning that we don't quite have enough support for these specific creature types yet, but in due time, this will be an absolute powerhouse of a commander. Then we have Qala, Ajani's Pridemate, 4-mana 3/3 legendary creature cat warrior. Whenever Qala, Ajani's Pridemate, attacks, other attacking creatures you control get +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of counters on Qala. Whenever you gain life, put a 1/1 counter on Qala. And of course, it wouldn't be WotC design by posing a question and answering it at the same time, where you can pay 4 to gain life to put 1/1 counter on Qala. So this is a great finisher. I'm not saying that it is not. However, the problem we run into with Qala is that this overrun slot is very clogged already if you are not caring specifically about the cat creature type or warrior creature type. So this is already competing in a typal deck with the new Banner of Kinship, for example. Coat of Arms would be another example that you would be slotting into this slot. And you even have a Chroma's Will, which is arguably the best white overrun effect in Commander. So this is already a clogged slot, and the question is, does it make it into, the top, we'll call it 6 or 7 versions of this effect, because that's really how we're going to be able to see this make an impact in Commander. So I think that you need to be able to give this haste. So if you are in Boros and you are running various haste enablers with Arena of Glory, for example, or something like a Bitter Reunion, you need to be able to get that attack trigger the turn it comes down, because to simply play your overrun completely telegraphic to the whole table, and you're just asking for it to be removed. So just a fair word of warning here that you really want to be careful with when you play the Qala, and that's assuming that you can already generate all of the synergy to give, your creatures +5/+0, assuming that you've got enough sort of life gain sources in the deck. I do think that this needs a little bit of a build around to be good, but if you have like a Rin and Siri deck that is focused on life gain or something like that, then you can maybe consider Qala. And I do like that it is a cat creature type, which is probably where I would slot it. It's just a generically good overrun effect, but sometimes the build around that's necessary with this card is not going to make the cut when you're competing with, great overrun effects like Akroma's Will within mono white. So that's Qala, Ajani's Pridemate. Next we have Generous Pup, 2-mana 2/2 creature dog with vigilance. Whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on Generous Pup, put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control. This ability triggers only once each turn. Now, who cares about that text box? Because look at this absolutely adorable art. Look at the little guy. He's offering the kitten his little bone or something, and it looks like he's got, it must be a sandwich. I didn't even notice at first, but it looks like there's a slice of cheese on there. Maybe it's a little melted in the sun with all the other kitties looking on. I just absolutely love the art. This is the most goated art out of both Foundations and J25. Hands down, absolutely love the art on this, and my wife is going to absolutely love this in a Rin and Siri deck. So Generous Pup is an amazing card beyond just the art. So quick shout out to Supply Runners. So Supply Runners is great in Pauper. I actually have this in my Conclave Mentor Pauper EDH deck. Basically ETB for 5 mana, put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control. That's not the necessary comparison, but there is somebody at WotC is trying to fill out their like dog and cat cube, I believe, because all of these dogs within Commander that you can search on Scryfall have this like weird +1/+1 counter synergy theme. So like Rescue Retriever, when it ETBs, put a +1/+1 counter on each other soldier you control. And if we go to like a couple more examples, Salt Rolled Ambushers has +1/+1 counter synergy. Yoshimaru Ever Faithful, but none of them are like super OP. I think Generous Pup is definitely the best dog we've seen just period within Commander so far. It's incredibly good, putting a +1/+1 counter on this guy every single turn to pump your creatures, and obviously if you're running Hardened Scales and Branching Evolution alongside that, this gets insane super quick for only 2 mana. So I really like the play pattern within these decks that are really on board to be able to start putting creatures down on 2 and 3. It's just too slow, I think, nowadays when you're really relying on not being board wiped to really start spewing out creatures on turn like 4. It's these powerful 2-drops, I think, that really enables these decks to actually get scary really quick before that board wipe comes down. But yeah, I think dogs just have this weird +1/+1 counter synergy going on. Generous Pup is the best we've seen so far, and I think that this will pretty much go into your +1/+1 counter decks. It's just an incredibly efficient tool for these decks to leverage, and I think it's relatively easy to just put a +1/+1 counter on your creature at least once per turn, if not multiple times per turn cycle. So that is Generous Pup. And moving us on here, we have Eidolon of Astral Winds, 3-mana 2/4 enchantment creature spirit. It has vigilance, and whenever Eidolon or Astral Winds or another enchantment you control enters, choose target creature you control. Until end of turn, that creature has base power and toughness 4/4 and gains flying. This card has so much packed into it for 3 mana. Not only does it give your team pumps, it is an enchantment itself, so it goes immediately into all of your Enchantress type of decks, and it is a spirit, which spirits also care about enchantments at the same time. In Enchantress decks, you are going to be making tokens whenever enchantments ETBs, Archon of Sun's Grace, Rabble Rousing. We see these a ton in Enchantress decks, and Eidolon of Astral Winds will be just an insta-slam, because now you can turn that 2/2 white Pegasus creature token with flying into a 4/4, and with Rabble Rousing, turn turn that 1/1 lowly dude on the ground who is a citizen paying taxes, I mean, geez, what a square, into now an angelic 4/4 that is ready to do battle with demons. I mean, how can you not like Eidolon of Astral Winds in your Enchantress decks? So Sith's Harvest Hand is where I'm going to be slotting this. The question I asked myself is this good enough to fit into a Shrine deck? So I have Goshintai of Life's Origin in here. I do think that Goshintai decks do want to beat down, but what I've seen them before primarily win through is just like basically spamming out as many shrines as possible, and then that is enough value between like burning or drawing cards or whatever to be able to win the game themselves. So if you are in a Goshintai deck and you have combat damage as a primary way of winning in Goshintai, then definitely slot in Eidolon of Astral Winds, and I promise you will not be disappointed. And I believe that brings us to the blue section of our video, starting us off here with Pol Jamaar Illusionist, 6 mana 4/5 with flying. It is a legendary human illusion wizard. When Pol Jamaar enters, choose a creature type, draw a card for each creature control of that type, which is a pretty nice top-end card draw spell for typal decks to avoid those inevitable board wipes, so you can capitalize on what you've built up before you get Blasphemous acted, which I think this is just a good top-end. If you guys remember, there was a Titan of Yara that came out, I think, a couple years ago. Basically the same effect, 6 mana 6/6 for 6. It is your chosen creature type, and whenever Titan of Yara ETBs or attacks, you may draw a card for each other creature you control that shares a creature type with it. If you do, discard a card. So Titan of Yara gets both ETB and attacks, but it doesn't count itself, and you have to discard at least one card. So it's going to be, you know, X-1 of whatever your number is on the battlefield. But basically, Pol Jamaar is a distant melody on a body, and I think that this specifically is very good in human and wizard decks, because Pol Jamaar in those decks counts itself if you choose one of those two creature types. So I actually really like this in my Inala Archmage Ritualist deck. This gives it eminence where you can pay 1 to create a copy of something when it enters. So for 7 mana, we can play Pol Jamaar, and assuming that we have a bunch of little, you know, looting type of wizards, which is basically what this deck wants to do, is spam out a bunch of little tiny wizards that all loot, put stuff in the graveyard, and then reanimate them. With Pol Jamaar, we can play it, capitalize on all of our wizards we've assembled so far, then make a copy of it for only 1 more mana to draw 8+ cards. It's absolutely insane. So I really like this in wizard decks because it will count itself. It's also a flyer, which is nice. And then Eowyn Shield Maiden, I really like this as well because you can curve into this very well. Eowyn Shield Maiden, 5 mana at the beginning of combat on your turn. If another human ETB'd under your control this turn, create 2/2 red human knight creature tokens with trample and haste. Then if you control 6 or more humans, draw a card. So with Eowyn, you clearly want to just go wide, and I think that is great to play Eowyn for 5, curve out into Pol Jamaar. Hopefully at some point you made a token along the way to trigger Eowyn to get those 2/2s. I think Pol Jamaar and Eowyn is absolutely great, and just a great play pattern by going 5 into 6 to just capitalize on all of that board presence. So that's Pol Jamaar Illusionist. Next we have Delightful Discovery, a 5 mana instant. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each spell your opponents have cast this turn. Scry 2, then draw 2, which is pretty great. I actually really like this card. I think that people at a minimum tend to double spell in Commander, if not triple spell late in the game. So I think truly late in the game, this is going to be either a 2 mana scry 2 draw 2 or a 1 mana scry 2 draw 2. But I think base case, you are mostly going to see this in the early game cost about 3, which I'm happy to pay because we have Behold the Multiverse, which is going to be a scry 2 draw 2 for 4 mana, but you can pay it in installments of 2. I mean, I just have variety research on the deck here because it's a similar effect where it costs 1 less to cast for each creature that attacked this turn, you know, being discounted. So it's going to be a conditional card draw spell, but I think Delightful Discovery in particular is easier to get that cost reduction than something like a Router Research because creatures are not always attacking, especially when there's a board stall, whereas people are always casting spells. You simply need to cast spells to win the game, and so Delightful Discovery is going to be great in your blue decks that need to dig for more cards, such as your combo-oriented decks. Specifically, I have a Jeskai combo deck, which aims to search for Kiki combos, so Delightful Discovery will definitely be going in there because it's going to be a basically 1 mana scry 2 draw 2, digs you 4 cards deep into your library, and if you're running scry synergy, so something like an Alagath Crossroads Augur will definitely want to insta-slam this into its deck as well. That is Delightful Discovery, and I believe that brings us to our black section of of the video with ash coat as our background here. Wriggling Grub is a 2-mana 1/1 creature worm. When it dies, create 2 1/1 black and green worm creature tokens. So I looked on Scryfall, and it turns out we don't yet have an effect where if you play this creature, it dies into 2 additional creatures. The most equivalent effect here would be like a Nested Shambler. When it dies, create X tapped 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens where X is its power. And Carrier Thrall, when it dies, create a 1/1 Eldrazi Scion creature token that ramps you for a colorless mana. So I really like Wriggling Grub just as a vegetable card in your Aristocrats type of decks. You simply want to play this, sack it, and then sack your 2 additional worm creature tokens for literally any effect. If you have a Phyrexian Altar, you're going to be making 3 mana off of playing Wriggling Grub for 2, so you're actually mana positive, which is great, and you can get the great sacrifice triggers off of something like a Korvold, for example. I'm tired of always mentioning Teysa Karlov when it comes to Aristocrats decks, so we're saying get out of here, Teysa Karlov. It's Braid's Arisen Nightmare's time to shine as the poster boy for Aristocrats type of decks in this video. But these are 2 commanders that might consider Wriggling Grub in the 99. Next, we have Ozox, the Clattering King. 3-mana 3/2 Skeleton Noble. Ozox, the Clattering King, can't block. When it dies, create Jumble Bones, a legendary 2/1 black skeleton creature token with this creature can't block, and whenever the creature leaves the battlefield, return target card named Ozox, the Clattering King, from your graveyard to your hand. Skeleton players, rejoice! We finally have a decent skeleton tribal commander. Before we were stuck with Skeleton Ship. Are you kidding me? What is this garbage people are piloting as the commander of their skeleton decks? Ozox is going to definitely take over from that garbage. I think Gisa the Hellraiser is a recent printing from Outlaws of Thunder Junction, which might have taken over as the pilot for many of those skeleton typal decks. But I think Ozox, if you want a skeleton in the command zone and in classic skeleton flavor, it is something to sacrifice that you can then get another 2/1 to sacrifice as well. I think that Ozox is going to be a good jank commander for all of your skeleton tribal decks out there. And I don't really have much to say. I have done no research into skeleton tribal decks. I imagine they're running effects like reassembling skeleton, and they're probably some sort of Aristocrats type of strategy just given the flavor. But that's all I'm going to say because I'm no expert as skeleton tribal. Next, we have Fumulus the Infestation. 4-mana 2/2 vampire insect. Curious how you get a vampire and an insect in the same creature type there, but anyway, it's a 2/2 flying death touch. Whenever a player sacks a non-token creature, create a 1/1 black insect creature token with flying. Whenever an insect, leech, slug, or worm you control attacks, defending player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. I think this is simply just a good insect commander. The most popular insect commanders we've seen are typically Golgari, Grist the Hunger Tide, and Zask Skittering Swarmlord are both very popular insect commanders. Insect decks as a whole are not super high powered in Commander. They're often, concerned about putting things in the graveyard, sacrificing things. So this definitely fits the bill for what insects are already looking to do. But if you have a Grist deck, slot in Fumulus and you'll probably be happy with it. And I do think that this is going to continue to be a trend that we see with WotC, where generally they have been printing a lot of I'll call them double sacrifice effects. I believe there's a new, it's like Valkyrie something, I forget the name of the card, but it's a 5-mana enchantment that allows you to sack things to create or to return them as angels. So it basically doubles all of your sacrifice effects by just returning your creatures back to the battlefield. Fumulus follows that same play pattern. Wilhelt comes to mind. Wilhelt the Rock Cleaver, similar thing, where anytime you sacrifice something, it's going to make you another token to be able to sacrifice it again for additional effect, whatever that may be. And if you care about sacrificing things, this is going to go into your deck, specifically if you care about insects, leeches, slugs, or worms. Next, we move on to our red section of the video. We have General Kreat the Boltbringer, 3-mana 2/2 Goblin Soldier. Whenever one or more goblins you control attack, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token that's tapped and attacking. And if that wasn't good enough, we have another line of text. Whenever another creature you control enters, General Kreat the Boltbringer deals 1 damage to each opponent. So an Impact Tremors effect on top of a Goblin Rabble Master. Absolutely insane. This is so good in your goblin decks that there's not actually actually much to say. If you have a Purphoros deck or a Krenko deck, this simply goes in. It does so much, and again, showcasing that WotC fire design by asking the question and tacking the payoff right on the same card there. The card just simply provides you a ton of value. So General Kreat the Boltbringer, I mean, would you play it as a commander? Maybe. It is a decent commander, again, if you're spamming out goblins, but Krenko already does that better. So I think really this is more of a 99 card in Krenko decks. But General Kreat, honestly one of the best cards in J25, but it's so good that there's not that much to say about it. So I think I'm just going to move on to our next card here, which is Firespitter Whelp. We did cover this in the Foundation set review. It is a 3-mana 2/2 creature dragon with flying. Whenever you cast a non-creature or dragon spell, Firespitter Whelp deals 1 damage to each opponent. So just a nice equivalent Kessig Flamebreather or Firebrand Archer type of effect. Personally, I have a Torbrand deck that amplifies these little pinging effects into 3 damage each, and it can become a menace pretty quick. So I think Firespitter Whelp, while it is 1 more mana more expensive, you do get a more relevant creature type by triggering off of dragons as well. So maybe you might slot this into your Miram deck as well if you care about copying this little guy as a dragon. And like I mentioned, Torbrand decks, Solfim decks all want this. And then we move on to green. So starting us off here with Sutina, Speaker of the Tajuru, 3-mana 2/2 Elf Scout. Whenever Sutina, Speaker of the Tajuru, enters, search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. Whenever Sutina attacks, you may return land control to its owner's hand. When you do, put a +++ counter on target creature. So this is an elf. I think that's great. Elves love ramping. Now, really, I think Sutina should be in the honorable mentions category, but it does beat out your Farhaven elves. So Farhaven elf officially has been power crept. Unless you care about the Druid creature type, but Sutina has just more text than Farhaven Elf while doing the same ability by ramping out a basic. So if you are in a deck like Yarok where you're looking to flicker things, copy ETB triggers, then this is a card you will want to slot into those decks. And then Springbloom Druid is another equivalent example here, but the thing with Springbloom Druid is that you mostly see this in landfall decks to get 2 landfall triggers off of it entering, so I don't think it'll quite beat out Springbloom Druid in landfall decks, but definitely Farhaven Elf if you're playing it for generic value. Next, we move on to Shroofus Sproutsire, which is a great name. 3-mana 1/1 Saproling legendary. It has trample, and whenever a Saproling you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many 1/1 green Saproling creature tokens. I think this is just a pretty cool Saproling commander if you're interested in being in mono green. We've seen Golgari and Jund. Typically, these are actually the 2 most popular commanders with Slimefoot the Stowaway and Slimefoot and Squee, and Saprolings tend to care about going wide, so Shroofus is both great in the 99 of these decks and as a commander, and I think that if you can connect with your Saprolings and Shroofus itself gets trample and you can buff this up somehow, you're going to be making more tokens, and from there you can build your deck around assembling all of those tokens to finish the game off with like a Critter Hoof Behemoth or your typical overrun effect. So that's pretty much Shroofus Sproutsire. Scythecat Cub is our next card here. 2-mana 2/2 cat. Boy, Rin and Siri decks are eating well with Foundations in J25. It has trample and says whenever a land you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. If this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, double the number of 1/1 counters on that creature instead. So while this isn't as good as Bristly Bill Spinesower in my personal opinion, this will beat out something like a Duskshell Crawler in my personal Atraxa +1/+1 counter deck, because Scythecat Cub just buffs and buffs and buffs every single turn. You're going to be hitting that landfall trigger. And with fetch lands, it synergizes. Atraxa decks in particular are already 4-color and are running many fetch lands on top of Fabled Passage, Prismatic Vista. So I think that you can definitely be putting not only 1/1 counters on things very quickly, but then doubling them. So I think that will honestly beat out Duskshell Crawler, which does give everything on my board trample. So Scythecat Cub, great also in cat decks if you care about that. So Scythecat Cub definitely going into +1/+1 counter decks across the globe. Then we have Go Forth, a 1-mana instant that says choose one, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle, or target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If this is familiar, it's because it is an equivalent effect to Bushwhack or Analyze the Pollen. These are all 1-mana secret MDFC lands, and here's why. If you have an untapped land on the battlefield and you are missing a land in your hand, but you've got Go Forth in your hand, you can tap your untapped land, cast the Go Forth, go get a basic into your hand, then play that untapped. And that is an equivalent action as simply having a tapped land into your hand and playing it onto the battlefield tapped. And you get the option to do other things, which is basically an MDFC land. So Bushwhack is the most popular and I think the best out of green. It gives you a fight spell, so an actual removal spell. I think that Go Forth is less good than Bushwhack, but I think 5 to 10% of the time, you might end up using that second mode as a little combat trick. Perhaps you're in a Gitrog Ravenous Ride deck that can afford a tapped land slot. You might actually use this as a pump effect. Or maybe in a Sergeant John Benton deck where you can be pumping him to draw more cards. I think that there is some extra utility you can get for a nice instant speed combat trick. So I think Go Forth can possibly go into a tapped land slot depending on what your mana base looks like, because I do understand that, you know, mana bases are very pressured on slots, and so this can be very difficult to find just a slot to devote to a tapped land. So, you know, pick and choose this. You might have to find more synergistic type of decks like your Gitrog Ravenous Ride type of decks. And our final card we're going to evaluate today is Dionus Elvish Archdruid, 4 mana 3/3 Elf Druid. Elves you control have, whenever this creature becomes tapped during your turn, untap it and put a +1/+1 counter on. This ability triggers only once each turn. My goodness, is this card absolutely cracked in elf ball decks. Absolutely cracked. It is simply a mana reflection, which costs 6 mana, by the way, on a 4 mana elf body, which elf decks clearly want. Before, we had to run janky options like Copperhorn Scout, which says whenever it attacks, untap each other creature you control. So all of your mana dorks would be able to untap, but then cast their spells during your second main phase. Whereas Dionus just allows you to do it all at 4 mana and puts a +1/+1 counter on them, buffing them up even more. It's just simply insane. This simply goes into elf ball decks everywhere. Personally, I used to have an Azuri Renegade leader deck that was so quick that it could win by roughly turn 5. I considered it sort of my highest power deck, and I took it apart because it's too fast. And I think that Dionus is just adding more support for Elf Ball and speeding up even more. And so I just think that Elf Ball decks don't need the extra support, although this is a very cool effect. So, you know, I'm not going to yuck anybody's yum here. If you want to slot this into your Elf Ball deck, absolutely, I would say do that if you're in for a high power game. But personally, I just found that Elf Ball is so good nowadays. It could simply combo off, like with an Azuri Renegade Leader, for example, could combo off by like turn 4 or turn 5 if you get a lucky draw with your Thornbite Staff or something like that. But Dionus just so good. Just put it in all of your Elf Ball decks and you won't be disappointed. So that brings us to our top 3 cards from Jumpstart 2025 across all colors. And if we could get a drum roll, please, we have General Kreat, the Boltbringer, Pol Jamaar Illusionist, and Dionus Elvish Archdruid. General Kreat going to be insta-slammed into all of the Goblin decks. Pol Jamaar, if you are in a Human or Wizard deck, I think you simply want to play this card, and I really like, too, the art, specifically the color combinations within this art. I think the red in the Mythic Mana symbol just meshes so well with the art. I just really like the aesthetic. And then Dionus is going to, once again, go in every single Elf deck out there. So I'm really fascinated at how Wizards printed a lot of power in Jumpstart 2025, given that Foundations was really supposed to be a set for Magic beginners, and I'm really happy to see a lot of powerful cards in these sets where it doesn't feel like the set is only for beginners, that's, you know, very simplified and things like that, but we actually get a lot of power behind the set as well within Commander. So that's the video, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you enjoyed this and want to see all of the awesome cards for Commander coming out in Foundations, I made a set review video for white, blue, black, red, green, including colorless in the blue video and multicolored in the green video. You can check those out in the links down in the description below to see all of the cards you don't want to miss for Commander from Foundations coming out on November 15th. That's the video, guys. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. Hopefully we see you all in the next one.